Hey everybody, and thank you for joining us in this webinar. So in this panel discussion, we're really going to be talking about asset performance, best practices, and maybe some common challenges that you guys are dealing with during these times. And we're going to have three of our experts on board to ask any questions that you guys might have. So as I said, this is an asset performance panel discussion, and we are going to have three of our experts here today. And we're going to talk about a variety of topics in this panel. So first, we're going to look at work priority and how does work order priority change with reduced staff in a lower demand. Later, we will look at PM optimization. How do we adjust our PMs based off of changes in demand? And then finally, we're going to look at backlog and how you can limit workforce can capitalize on the current environment. But if you do have other questions that maybe are outside of this, by all means, go ahead and ask those as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to our first expert, Jeremy Borton, and he can talk a little bit about work priority. So appreciate it.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. As Burley stated, my name is Jeremy Borton. I'm going to be kicking things off with job priority. But first, I want to explain why and what we're doing here today. You know, we decided to put this roundtable together for a couple of reasons. And like most of you, I'm sure, and most of the population, we're working from home, working remotely with little contact with coworkers and clients. So we started discussing, the potential areas within industry that may be impacted by the current climate. So the idea is really just to simply have a discussion around a few key areas that Burley mentioned, and possibly we'll reach some of you that identify with these topics that we're going to discuss today. So this is intended to be very informal and just simply promote good conversation. So as Burley mentioned, feel free to speak up, typing in the chat box during. You don't need to wait till the end. It's entirely up to you. So with that, I'll kick off job priority. And, now more than ever, work prioritization may be an area of opportunity for all of us. And so I want to start that off by asking you to think about two questions as we continue to discuss job priority. And the first one being, how are you identifying your work? And the second one, how are you prioritizing your work? So the other thing, how many of you have ranked work orders that clearly define prioritization to the rest of the staff? In my experience, I've seen a majority of organizations neglect the benefits of establishing clearly defined priorities within their system. I've also seen some organizations have too many conflicting prioritizing systems or nothing at all. And so what are some of the drawbacks of not clearly defining work priority? And a few examples that pop into my head are the potential for critical work being shuffled around or potentially sitting in backlog. Operations has a tendency to be angry, wasted technician wrench time, or a lack of faith in maintenance. That never happens, right? So just a few examples to think about some of the drawbacks of not clearly defining work priority. And so what do you think on the other end of that spectrum? What do you think some of the advantages of establishing work priority would be? And this is where I'd like to open up the floor for you to speak up or just simply chat, text your questions in there. But, what are some of the advantages of establishing work priority? Anyone care to offer up an opinion? Feel free to put that right in the chat. And if not, we'll just move on. That's fine. So establishing a standardized method to prioritize work, that's going to remove that gut feeling or what we call tribal knowledge approach. If you're not familiar with some of these terms, the tribal knowledge is something that I've used for years. And it's just, if I use myself as an example, so I'm a young apprentice, I'm working with my SME, and that SME is teaching me all these great habits, but I'm also getting those bad habits as well. So the idea is to establishing standardized methods, not that gut feeling or tribal knowledge, so that we develop a repeatable process. The standardized approach, this is going to improve work processes by prioritizing work based on overall operational impact, not just operations saying, hey, you need to work on this. Or maybe the maintenance coordinator saying, hey, this is priority, jump on it. We really want to establish a standardized process so that we are all working from the same playbook. So under the assumption that major assets and their criticality have been established, conducting analysis to further rank through asset criticality and work impact is a perfect example of RIME, or ranking index for maintenance expenditures. RIME also allows the combination of asset criticality and work impact to be cross-referenced so we can provide a relative weight to each task when we compare it to all other work. So I'm going to move to the next slide and give you a quick and an easy example of what I'm talking about. And so, as you can see here, we establish criteria for 6 to 8 questions, defining critical statements, and then we do the same for work order impact statements. And so the example that you see here is we have 2 work orders, and work order 1 has a criticality of 4 and work impact of 4, giving it a total priority of 16, while work order 2 has a total priority of 9. So by establishing these statements, we can quickly go through this and rank our work orders. So, whatever you want to call it, RIME or work priority, however you're using this process, we want to establish intelligent numerical terms so that we can quickly identify work order priority. And here's another reason why this is a good example that I've seen often. And so if you're a planner and you're looking at a pile of work orders in critical pile A and pile B, and you're prioritizing them based on your work experience or the maintenance coordinator's direction or operations, how do you further put those work orders in sequential order if I've got multiple A's and multiple B's? So whatever you call it, however you decide to proceed, you've got to establish this intelligence. Once this intelligence exists in your work order system, you can quickly start pulling work forward or pushing it out, and it's far more flexible, and it's backed by a repeatable, established process. It's backed by numbers. So as I move to my next slide, this will give you an idea of the RIME that I mentioned previously. And that's your work order priority definitions. And so you can see that we've established these definitions in here so that we can continue to work through this and prioritize our work based on a repeatable process that everyone is familiar with. So you can see here that, work order priority, we've got 1E, 2U, 3H, 4R, and 5N. And then as you look at the RIME, this allows us to quickly identify what is our emergency work, what is our urgent or critical work, high potential impact all the way down to, not really relevant, or maybe it requires a management of change documentation. So this is just something that I wanted to put out there for you to think about and to kick off today's panel discussion about how do we effectively prioritize our work, especially under the, in the current climate. Maybe some of you are operating at half staff or skeleton crews, or maybe we're not operating all of our production lines. So there is an area of opportunity for us to go in and pull forward this work that maybe we can't often get to. And so just something to think about as we kick off this discussion. And so the work priority, that completes my discussion as we kick this off to the other hosts. And so at this time, I want to ask you, do you have any questions about job priority? If not, we'll move forward. But this is definitely something, it's an area of opportunity that I think we should all be considering. We should all be talking about amongst our teams within our industry and at our site. Any questions from the panel? Click on the chat box, see if I see anything. The gut feeling. Justin's familiar. So let's see, Kat, is this system too complicated to implement? I think if you saw what I showed you, I think it's fairly simple to start out. It really depends on where you are on the maturity continuum. And so I think you can start out, fairly easy from establishing that criteria. And then from there, we can get more complex and start developing a rhyme if we want. Danny, is the critical path equipment available? And so this is under the assumption that you've performed criticality analysis. And if we've performed criticality analysis, then we can continue to develop that criteria around our work orders. And then we rank them against each other. So it's asset criticality times our work impact. We don't have to over-engineer this or overcomplicate it. But yes, we definitely have to have performed our criticality analysis. Otherwise, what are we basing our work off? It's not risk-based, so what is it? It goes back to that tribal knowledge. It goes back to, well, this is the way we've done it for 30 years. And so I don't think there's a great deal of effort with the slides that I've showed you in establishing that criteria. Great questions. Any more questions? Or if you want me to expand and I haven't fully answered your question, please feel free. Again, this is very informal. You can jump on, ask whatever you want. And we can also circle back, take any questions offline. Like Burley said, you can reach any of us at any time so that we'll have those office hours. If more questions come to mind, maybe when we're done, please feel free to reach out to us. We're available. We're all working from home, or some of us are hiding from other family members. So I would love to continue this conversation if it works for you. So if there are no more questions, I'm going to kick this off to our other subject matter expert, Mrs. Catherine Sanchez. Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeremy. So as Jeremy mentioned, my name is Catherine Sanchez. I want to touch on another topic that will also help in operating with a reduced workforce, and that is PM optimization. How do we adapt to this change in demand? So your operations is most likely either experiencing higher demand or a sudden downturn due to the current environment. How do we proactively adjust our PMs based on this change in demand? So PMs, they're planned maintenance events. They're initiated to either prevent a failure or to maintain the equipment in its optimal working condition. If you look at the slide, what you see is a roadmap. So he's climbing the stairs. He's basically reaching excellence in maintenance by means of advancing his maintenance strategies. So depending on the maturity of your maintenance program, you may be somewhere at the bottom, which is more reactive maintenance. This is where you're running to failure. You're not really doing a maintenance event until you have some sort of fail happen. And then you need to go into action as far as identifying what the failure is, how you mitigate it, how to address it, all the way to the top. So maybe a little bit more mature maintenance strategy is that prescriptive predictive maintenance. So that's that top end of the excellence in maintenance. So this is where you're using predictive analytics, you're using sensor data, and that's how you're initiating your maintenance program. So I kind of want to open up with a question here. What is the majority of your PMs? Are they calendar-based? Are they usage-based? Are you using predictive analytics? Put in the chat or just kind of type something in. Okay, we already have a question. Yeah, that's the question I want to ask there. So what is your PM program right now? Does anybody want to share where they're at? We'll give it a second. Okay, that's fine too. So what I tend to see with clients that I visit and do audits for is that we tend to see that majority of the PMs are calendar based. So majority of the clients are working in that calendar base. Some are creeping into that usage base, but majority have PM set on a calendar. So what I want to talk about today is how do we optimize our calendar-based PMs? This is what I want to focus on. Looking forward to initiating, even moving towards and up that ladder towards usage-based PMs. So let's take a step back. Where do we start? Let's focus on one asset type or one product line. You want to ask yourselves, is everything seeing a demand and change? If yes or if no, start with the assets that are operating lines or assets or operating lines that are experiencing the most drastic change in usage. If the entire portfolio of assets or your entire operations is seeing a slowdown, choose the assets or the operations that's seeing the largest impact. What is that 80-20? Where can you make the biggest impact? What is the majority of your assets? Oh, also we see a reaction to the last question. So Danny is saying that he's mostly reactive and calendar based. Yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing. Okay, so we know where to focus. We know what asset type or product line to focus on. Now, how do we adjust? So if your focus assets are already meter based, then the triggers are going to change with the change in demand. Basically, your PMs are going to adjust proportionally. So that's if you're in that yellow zone there. As the usage changes, you already have your PMs proportionally adjusting as well. So an example of meter-based maintenance is ones where your triggers are initiated based on a meter. So example of that could be hours, so how long the equipment's been running for. I kind of want to open another question here. Can somebody come up with an example of another way to measure usage? I'll open it up. So what are ways we can determine the usage or utilization of our equipment? I already gave one example, which is those hours. Anybody have another example? Oil samples, yes. So that's a good one for condition maintenance, right? So what is the condition of their equipment? Based on the condition, you're going to make an action. So actually oil samples, you're really getting into that predictive maintenance. You're going into what analytics on the oil conditions and the different elements within the oils or different byproducts are going to tell you what maintenance you even need. So that's even the step above. That's not even usage. We're looking at predictive. So that's a great example. Okay, so another example, if you look, I have a few examples on the slide. There's you could do rotation. So if you have a fan or even a shaft, you can get an idea of how much the rotations are. If you look at distance, you can get an idea of how long it's been running. Flow rate, so if you have flow mirrors, you can have this translate into the volume and know how much has been running through that pipe, through that pump, through that tank. You get an idea of usage there. I see Jose has written a comment here. If we have a repair that's expensive, but the production is more than the cost of the repair, should I repair? That's a great one. So this is where you're really taking that reliability approach and you're looking at doing analysis on the cost versus the cost of repair. So this is probably even a step outside of just adjusting your maintenance strategy. This is really when you're trying to do a reliability approach to your maintenance. And really when this comes into play is when you're looking at end of life. So you're looking at when your equipment's reached your life or your usage. That's when you determine, is it best to repair or to replace the entire asset? So Jose, this is a great one. This is one that I could probably talk extensively about. So maybe this is one of those that I can reach out to you afterwards and we can have another conversation. But it's a good one, especially with reliability when you're taking a step back to start looking at and thinking about when to repair and when to replace. That's a good one. So I wanna give an example. I have another slide here that's gonna give an example on how we can adjust based on the demand. So if you look here, this guy is maintaining or doing maintenance on a C pump. So maybe this is repacking the pump where you're replacing the different packing, which could be your seals, your different wiper seals, the oiling. So this is a routine maintenance event. So let's say that when the PMs were implemented, it was determined that at 780,000 gallons, the pumps need to be repacked. All right, so now the normal demand, you were seeing about 780,000 gallons per month. So with that, they put a monthly PM. So you have a monthly PM to repack the pump. Well, now there's a demand change, right? So let's say today's conditions, you're running the pumps at a lower rate. You're also maybe furloughing or shutting down the facility to save a bit there too. So maybe 8 hours instead of the 10 hours a day, 3 days a week instead of the 5. So now instead of 780,000 gallons per month, you can see that the current demand has dropped down to 259,000 gallons per month. So what do we do with this? This means that our monthly PM, you're not really going to need to do that maintenance event until 3 months. So this lets you push out that calendar PM from a monthly to a quarterly PM. So this is just a way so you can do some quick actions today to move out your PMs to help with that reduced workforce so you don't start building up more and more PMs, get more and more work orders, and you're starting to build up that backlog. What we want to also do, and this is a good opportunity for reliability, if you're home working from home remotely and you want some projects, you can start long-term looking at moving up that ladder, moving up that roadmap for excellence in maintenance. If we are primarily calendar-based and we do have some meters, how do we move to a meter-based program? Ideally, we want those PMs to automatically adjust. We want them to move out or move in based on the increase or decrease in asset utilization. I will note this isn't always the solution. There's usually a combination of different maintenance strategies. For example, maintenance outside of this is seasonal maintenance. Maybe it's based on weather, or routine maintenance or regulatory maintenance. This is probably a DOT or regulatory inspection that has to happen annually. Those things you can't really move out based on demand. So it's going to be a multi-approach to your excellence in maintenance, but this is definitely some ways we can do some quick wins and help relieve some of that backlog that's starting to build up on those PMs. Oh, we have a question here. So Kat has asked, how do you suggest we add meter-based PMs? All right, great question. So what I would do is I would first, we talked about where to start, look at the assets that you do see are your 80-20, what do you have the biggest impact? Once you've identified which assets you'll have a biggest impact on, I would look to see what meters you're currently measuring. Do you have flow meters on the equipment? Do you have, a Prex switch where you can measure the rotations? Do you have a odometer, something that can measure hours or usage or miles? So I would look with what meters you currently have. Then I would try and get them to be pulled into your business system. How do you pull them to your business system? You can either do manual entries, or you can have them, move to the next step in data analytics and have them automatically pull in. So that's maybe a bigger picture, but at least you can start to see what meters are we reading, and if you know at what point you see failures, you can start prioritizing those meters and figure out how to get those put into your business system to initiate your PMs. I hope that helps. Sometimes it can be quite a roadmap, but at least you can start with the ones that you currently know, or you're currently already measuring for meters. So I see Justin's also asked a question here. How do I know if CMs or predictive is a good solution based on your risk matrix? Great. That's a great point to start. So I wanted to kind of initiate a quick win. How do we push out the PMs we already have, and how do we move them in or out based on our demands? These are our quick wins. Longer term is you want to have a good risk matrix. You want to know what your critical, less critical failure modes are and what you're trying to mitigate. So if you do have a good risk matrix, then you can make your solution based on that. So based on how they fail and if there was a way to mitigate them. So maybe you're doing a FAMICA, or maybe you're doing an RCM where you're actually going through a systematic way of analyzing the failures and how critical they are. You also, part of that, will probably look at how to mitigate or prevent these failures as well. This is something with MaxGrip we offer to clients. We come in, we facilitate these RCMs, but also this is something you can do with your team too to try and start building some information about how do you prevent it? Do we just wait for a CM, which is an event based on a failure, or do we put some PMs in the system or some monitoring? So Justin, I think that's definitely a roadmap. That's definitely a step back and doing some strategic or systematic way of determining your risk and how to mitigate that. I hope that helps. Okay, and I see there's another one here too. So Jose, Do you know any maintenance programs that utilize all different techniques, but in a overlapping way? Yeah, so that top one, if you saw that, that roadmap, the top one is prescriptive. So what prescriptive does is it's using, and this kind of touches on Justin's point too, it's using so you're looking at how they fail, how your equipment's failing, and how to mitigate that. So it's not always gonna be a calendar, it's not always gonna be a utilization based, it's not always gonna be a sensory or condition-based maintenance. Usually your best approach is gonna be an overlapping technique. So you wanna use some condition-based, some utilization-based. You wanna see where it fits best, right? So when you start to prioritize these with a maintenance strategy, or with a maintenance tool like RCM, like FMEA, you'll start to understand what can we measure, what do we want to measure, what is critical that we probably want to take the next step and install a sensor and have a technique that's maybe condition-based. We're not doing an action until we see a degradation. Or maybe this failure is so critical that we need to prevent it before we even see a degradation. And we need to put a calendar or utilization base and start to swap things out. Or maybe this part is not so critical. A good example is, lights in a room, right? So a lot of times we're not proactively switching out those light bulbs. We're waiting till they fail. So that actually is a reactive, and that's an overlapping technique. So you want to do the right maintenance at the right time. And the right maintenance is not always utilization based. It's not always wait to failure or CMs. It's an overlapping of these different techniques. I hope that answers that. Any more questions or comments? Again, I know Burley mentioned we're going to have office hours. If you have any more follow-up to these questions, or you want a little bit more back and forth on these, Justin, Jose, Kat, anybody, you're welcome to join into those office hours, and I'd be happy to have a one-on-one exchange, and we can go a little bit further into these different ideas as well. So with that, I'll pass it on to Robert. Robert's going to be talking about how to capitalize during this downtime and how to work with your backlog.
Good morning or good afternoon to all of you. I'm Robert, and I've seen some very good questions being put up there by you folks out there, or panelists, as far as Justin, Danny, Jose, and Justin. Great questions, and I think we could talk at length on any one of those. So feel free to continue on with the conversation afterwards, and we can go one-on-one, because some of these we need a little bit more insight as to what's going on, what your real question is trying to drive at, so we can give you the best answers that we can. My topics are going to be around the backlog. And we want to treat this time as an unplanned outage. It's an unfortunate time that, we find ourselves in this new situation with this virus going around, and it's kind of limited our access to work. But some of the facilities might have some skeleton crews, as Jeremy alluded to. We need to keep these plants ready to roll, so when we go back into production, we maintain the equipment and make sure that it's ready to go. So we're going to look at this as opportunity maintenance. It's the same thing that we do in the facilities. When we have an unplanned outage, a lot of facilities shut down, the equipment is shut down, and we look for the opportunity to do certain things on the line since the equipment's down, and we send crews in there to do some quick fixes or some PMs that we can take advantage of while the line is down. So we want to look at this as an opportunity to fine tune our line that are down right now, if we can get in there and do some certain work. Remember, priority one is to perform all your work safely and to follow all company safety policies and procedures as we go through this process, okay? So let's start on the first one. I want to talk a little bit about definitional backlog, so we're all clear on what we're talking about. So the definition for backlog is all past due and future work activities, regardless of their status or work type. And I'll show you the difference in the work order statuses and the different work types. Those work types were in that rhyme that Jeremy talked about. You've got some work orders that are corrective maintenance, some of them that are preventive maintenance, some of them are other, which could be cosmetic, could be hanging up wall boards. They could get classified in there. Some are immediate death, life, or health. They're emergency. Those don't even go to the plan and function. Those go into emergency work. They break schedules, on and on. Those are the statuses that the status of a work order would be like something was initiated and then it goes into approval. We'll talk about that going forward. So that's what we're talking about, the status of the work order and the work types, the different kinds. They have been identified, and these that are in the backlog have not been canceled or have not yet been completed. So we're going to be looking for those. What is a clean backlog? A clean backlog is defined as a backlog that has been validated, approved. It contains only the quality work orders, and there's no duplicates, and it encompasses all different kinds of work activities. So the first bullet there we talk about is what I see is how we can approach the upcoming PMs that are in the backlog. You know, you just heard Catherine talking about maybe some of these have demand changes. So your demand says, hey, I don't have quite the demand that I used to have, so my frequency needs to be adjusted accordingly so that I'm not over PMing or under PMing, whatever the case might be. So you need to look at that. So the question, if your manufacturing facility has experienced a shutdown or slowdown in production volume due to the reduced demand or manpower that's available to work at the equipment, then with these limited resources, use this opportunity to perform string-based PMs on the critical equipment on the assembly line. You notice that we keep talking about critical. You know, if you, like Jeremy stressed and also Catherine stressed, if it's critical, we need to keep our eye on it. So that goes to say that if you haven't done a criticality analysis, it's a good time to start considering putting something in place. Because some assets that are out there, some of the equipment that you have out there has a very vital function that we need to make sure it's available so that we can make our product, whatever it is that we make. The simple PMs that I'm talking about, excuse me, these are PMs that have been waiting for a shutdown. Sometimes we code PMs to say, this can only be done during a shutdown. So go into your backlog and look for those, because here's an opportunity to pull those forward. The seasonal PMs. There are some PMs that say we can only do these prior to the summer because there's certain things that we want to do to prepare the facility for these the heat that's coming up in the summertime. Or any upcoming PMs that you say, you know what, we have an opportunity to do that. If we wait 3 weeks or 4 weeks down the line, we're going to have to get in here into an area that is not as easily to get to when we're running. So maybe you've got some of those that you want to move forward and you can go ahead and do them ahead of time. So what we're trying to do is start on one end of the line all the way to the opposite end of the line, doing all the work that we can do on these PMs, which include lubrications, filter changes, any based on their condition. If they look like they need to be changed, change them out. Perform instrument calibrations. Maybe you can get with operations and perform your vibration routes. Maybe you can go in and say, we're going to do the thermal scans on the equipment, the electrical equipment that feeds these lines, and see what the condition those are in. But of course, maintenance needs to coordinate their work activities with production, just like they always have, in order to perform these predictive tests. Because usually we're going to have the equipment running to run a vibration, etc., or the thermography scans. Take your oil samples. So that's how the approach would be for looking at PMs that are in the backlog. Any questions so far? Okay, the second one I want to talk about is how to approach the ready to schedule corrective maintenance work orders in the backlog. We now have shifted from the PMs to the CMs. The things we want to look at there will be things such as review your ready backlog. And when I talk about the corrective maintenance ready backlog, that means that the status on the work orders have moved to ready status, which means that the planners have done all the work. All the parts are here. They're ready to schedule. They're ready to be executed. So we want to look in the backlog and say, on these particular lines, what do we have that's ready? Especially on those production lines that are critical for us to make our product. And obviously our product brings money to the bottom line. So we want to fine tune these lines. We also want to look for work orders that have been classified as deferred maintenance. Sometimes PMs come to you, we don't do them for whatever reason, operations won't give it to us, or maybe we didn't have the money at the time. We defer the maintenance for whatever reason. We want to look and see if we've deferred some of this work and see if it's something that we need to do now while we have the opportunity. Maybe it was going to take too much time. They thought it's a 20-hour job. I'm not giving it to you for that long. Well, maybe this is the time to get it done. And thirdly, we're going to look at any approved CMs that came into the system based on root cause analysis. Some of these RCAs, they find issues with the equipment that they say, put in a work order and let's repair, let's replace, whatever it might be, their solution to improve the ability of that particular asset to perform its function. So we want to look at those as well. So we've talked about ready backlog, we talked about deferred maintenance, and any CMs that came through from root cause analysis. There may be others, but these are three that come to mind. The intent here is to restore the assembly line equipment to their normal operating conditions. That's what maintenance wants to do. Put it back to where it's ready to run when we get into the new normal. Everybody goes back to work. We fine-tuned our equipment. We're ready to go. The third bullet, we talk about perform equipment inspections of the equipment on critical assembly lines. We want to perform equipment inspections on these critical assembly lines. And these inspections usually look at all the equipment on the line. The inspector will note anything that appears to need work and writes a work request on the problems that they see. These are the work requests that you're finding now that are going to become the backbone, the backlog of corrective maintenance for the schedule. You want to make sure the inspectors are working with clear, specific directions about what to look for during that equipment inspection. They're going to be looking for things such as inspect for certain conditions. We might be doing some cleaning. Cleaning is going to be very important going forward for sure. Tightening, adjusting, lubricating, replacing, etc. Now you might find some equipment issues that you don't have a corrective maintenance already written up, and it may become urgent. So we'll talk about what do you do with that as we go to the next slide. Any questions so far? Okay, let's take a look at what I was talking about in the backlog. On this particular chart, on this bar chart, you see, the very first bar chart you see, it says backlog in orange there, and you've got a little cloud over work schedule is ready to schedule RSCED. The work orders have moved from work has been approved, work has been planned, the work order is planned, it's been approved by planning, it's ready to schedule. Everything's ready to go. So let's not waste our time until it's going to ready to schedule, which means, hey, take it, execution, maintenance, execute the work. Those are the ones you're going to be pulling. As you work them, it's in progress, and then you'll complete it, then you'll close it, and then it's closed up with all the parts, materials, and all the overheads are closed it for historical reasons, including the failure code. Down at the bottom, we look at the overdues. We're looking at those work orders that may have been deferred. We're looking at PMs that may have been missed. We're looking at also things in the future that say, can we pull these forward? Does it make sense to pull them into a schedule now? Okay. I see a question. How much do you think is the delay time limit of backlogs in a crisis situation? From Jose. Jose, again, if you don't mind, I think that is a great question. I could talk to you at length on that. So if you want, we can set up a time to discuss and we can go one-on-one. And I'd love to be able to go in there with you to make sure I'm clear as to what you're seeing. and so that I can give you the appropriate answer. Does that sound fair enough? Okay. Any others? Go to the next slide, and I'm going to show you the schedule, because it's very important. We need to put this to a schedule. Here's an example, and this example is coming from an industry expert in work management, which is Doc Palmer. And this kind of ties into what Jeremy was trying to get at earlier, and also a little bit about how do we bring PMs in here that Catherine was talking about. If you look at this particular schedule that was developed, the things that they look for and when you're putting a schedule together are very key important things to do. You want to look at sequence the list by your asset criticality first. If you look at that criticality, 9 in this case is high. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to do the priority next. And in this case, priority 2 is better than is a higher priority than 3. They got it in that manner in this case. So what we're looking at here, we've got a crit 9 with a priority 2 to replace the motor on a brine tank. And you also want to take the highest, greatest estimated hours first. Put those on the schedule, knock that work out. And then you work your way down. The second one is a crit 5, but it's also a priority 2, and it's also a replacement. Following that, here's a quarterly inspection that's got a crit 8, priority 3, and on and on. Now you're lubricated right below there. So you've got a mix. You've got corrective, you've got inspections, you've got PMs, on and on. You're looking at how critical is this asset to me and what's the priority. And those are set up early on, like Jeremy said. You should have some kind of system to help guide what's more important than the other. What if I have this schedule right now and all of a sudden I'm doing an inspection and I'm saying, uh-oh, I found something. Do I break the schedule? If it's an emergency, you always break schedule. If it's an emergency, classified emergency, you'll break schedule and go to work on it immediately. If it's urgent, put the work order in the system, continue to work on what you're working on, and it may become the next work order you work on if it's urgent enough. You may decide with operations and with the maintenance coordinator that it needs to be attended to, and you'll do a schedule break and add it to the schedule. But if you'll follow these things that we've talked about today, I think you can take advantage of the fact that I'm working on the right stuff at the right time, because the criticality is established. It's very critical to us. The priorities have been established. We've looked at the PMs. We've looked at fine-tuning the lines. We've inspected the lines. Take advantage of this time to do these things. And I think that when the time comes when we go back up to full production, you'll be happy that you've taken some of these things into account if they fit you. And I see some more messages here. Let me take a quick look. Is the equipment available or is it in use for the current operation? Danny, it's one of those situations where I'm talking about here is if you're in a shutdown mode and you have an opportunity to do these things, these are things that you can do. If you still need to use these same type of practices while your equipment is operating. You need to go in there and make sure you're working on the right things at the right time. If the equipment has problems and you know it, based on the fact that maybe you've got some predictive maintenance information, vibration levels are high, or the thermography scan showing that your bearing is running really hot, and you couple that with the vibration reading, then you need as a maintenance individual, you need to go to the meeting and say, I need this equipment because it's got serious problems and I need to take it out of service. I need you to give me the line, let me work on this equipment now, as soon as possible, and over the weekend, and get it scheduled, get it on a schedule, and get it executed at that time. Yeah, as you were saying there, the sequence to schedule the work orders that need to be executed, that is the sequence that we would like for you to use. Again, looking at this schedule here that's been provided, for example, The sequence is take your highest criticality with the highest priority with the highest amount of estimated hours. Put that on your schedule first and then work your way down. Okay. And that is the schedule that you would provide operations, and the operations has it. They're going to clear the equipment for you if it's running. They'll make sure it's locked out, tagged out, and you'll put your people on it. Everybody knows where you're at, and then continue to execute the schedule until you complete, and just work safely. This is the sequence you would follow for this example that I've just given you. Any other questions? And of course, this will be provided to you by Burley at the end of the session, so you can take a look at all the things that we've talked about today. And we are open for further questions. And I do want to hear from I think the question that I meant that Jose had on how much time do you think is the delay during the delayed timeline of backlogs in a crisis situation. I'd like for you to get in touch with me, Jose, afterwards, and we can talk a little bit further about it to make sure I understand and give you the better answer that I can. Okay? Having said that, then if nothing else, then I'm going to turn it back over to Burley. Thank you, Burley.
Everybody, thanks for joining us today. I know it was Good Friday, so I do appreciate you guys hopping on. Hopefully you were able to get some good information out of this webinar, and we're able to answer some of your questions. I really do appreciate all the attendees who asked questions, and as I said, hopefully we're able to give you some good answers. I mentioned earlier in the webinar, but I do want to repeat that this webinar was recorded, and you should receive the recording for this webinar either later this afternoon or at the very latest on Monday morning. And you can, feel free to share that recording with any of your colleagues. As our panelists have said, we will be having quote unquote office hours next week. Those times will be in the follow-up email that will, and the links to attend those office hours will be in the follow-up email that has this webinar recording. So I really do encourage you guys to hop on those office hours because it's really just a free area to ask any sort of questions that you might have kind of one-on-one with our panelists. And without, if there are no further questions or anything else, I hope you guys have a good rest of your Friday and a really great weekend. And I appreciate you guys joining us today. So thank you.